The unseen passenger. It was an early spring morning, and the airport buzzed with life. Passengers hurried through the terminal, their faces etched with the anticipation of destinations unknown. Flight attendants in crisp uniforms smiled and directed travelers, their polished demeanor masking the exhaustion of long shifts. Among them was Claire, a seasoned flight attendant with over a decade of experience. She wore her professionalism like armor, navigating the chaos with ease. Claire's flight that day was a cross-country journey to Los Angeles, a route she had flown countless times. It was a full flight, with passengers ranging from business travelers in tailored suits to families heading off on vacations. As she reviewed her passenger manifest, she noted nothing unusual, a diverse mix as always. As boarding began, Claire stood by the entrance of the aircraft, greeting passengers with the customary welcome aboard. She was adept at quickly sizing people up, a skill honed over years of dealing with every type of traveler imaginable. Then he appeared. A man in his late 30s or early 40s stepped onto the plane. He was dressed in a simple black turtleneck and well-worn jeans, carrying a leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His posture was straight, and his stride was deliberate, but there was nothing outwardly remarkable about him. Yet something about his quiet confidence caught Claire's attention. She smiled warmly as she greeted him. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard." He nodded slightly, his expression unreadable, and moved toward his seat in economy class. Claire's gaze lingered for a moment, but the press of passengers behind him forced her to refocus. The man settled into a seat near the window in the middle of the plane, his demeanor calm and composed. The flight crew sprang into action once all passengers were seated. Claire moved through the aisles, checking seatbelts and ensuring that everything was in order. When she reached the man's row, she noticed he was already engrossed in his phone. He didn't look up as she passed, and she noted his reserved nature. Just another quiet traveler, she thought, and moved on. The plane taxied and took off smoothly. Once the seatbelt sign was off, Claire and her colleagues began the beverage service. As Claire approached the man's row, she prepared for the usual routine. She reached his seat and leaned slightly forward. "Good morning, sir. Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone polite but efficient. He glanced up briefly, his eyes sharp and clear. "Just water, please," he replied in a low, steady voice. Claire handed him a bottle of water and moved on. Yet as she continued her rounds, she found herself thinking about him. He seemed ordinary, too ordinary. His presence was understated, yet there was something commanding about the way he carried himself. She shook off the thought and returned to the task at hand. Midway through the flight, Claire noticed the man again. He had put his phone away and was staring straight ahead, his face thoughtful and serious. His stillness was striking amid the hum of activity in the cabin. Claire found herself wondering who he was, but she had learned long ago not to dwell on passenger stories. Everyone had their reasons for traveling, and it wasn't her job to pry. As the flight progressed, Claire's focus returned to the routine. She served drinks, answered questions, and assisted with minor issues. Yet, a nagging feeling lingered, an intuition that there was more to the quiet man in seat 17A. Toward the latter half of the flight, an incident occurred that disrupted the calm. A passenger in first class complained about their meal, loudly demanding to speak with the crew supervisor. Claire was called to assist, and she handled the situation with her usual professionalism. By the time she resolved the issue, she was exhausted but relieved to have avoided a larger scene. Returning to the economy cabin, she passed the man in 17A again. He was typing on a laptop now, his expression focused. Claire couldn't help but glance at the screen, catching a glimpse of what appeared to be detailed financial projections. She quickly looked away, feeling intrusive. By the time the flight began its descent, Claire had all but forgotten her earlier curiosity about the man. She was too busy preparing for landing, ensuring the passengers were safely secured and the cabin was in order. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, Passengers began gathering their belongings. Claire stood at the front of the plane, ready to bid them farewell. One by one, they filed out, offering the usual mix of polite nods and hurried goodbyes. When the man from 17A approached the exit, he paused briefly. For the first time, Claire noticed the faintest trace of a smile on his otherwise serious face. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice calm yet firm. "You're welcome, sir. Have a great day," Claire replied automatically, but something about his tone made her wonder if she had missed something important. After he exited, Claire found herself watching him walk away through the terminal, his stride confident and purposeful. It wasn't until much later that she would learn the truth about the man in seat 17, a truth that would turn her assumptions on their head and teach her a lesson she would never forget. The encounter. After the passengers disembarked, Claire busied herself with the usual post-flight routine, checking for left-behind items, ensuring the cabin was clean, and completing her final checklist. The man in seat 17A had slipped from her thoughts until her colleague, Melissa, approached with a curious look on her face. "Did you hear about the guy in 17A?" Melissa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire frowned. "What about him?" Melissa leaned closer, her eyes glinting with intrigue. "Apparently, he's someone important. Mark, the lead, said he caught a glimpse of his ID card when he handed it over during boarding. CEO of some big company." Claire blinked, surprised. The man in the simple black turtleneck and jeans. She hadn't pegged him for someone of that stature. "CEO," she echoed, trying to reconcile the information with the quiet, unassuming man she had served water to without a second thought. "Yeah," Mark said the logo on his ID was the same as the one for Solara Aviation. Melissa continued, lowering her voice even more. "You know, the luxury airline that just bought out our company." Claire's stomach dropped. Solara Aviation was a name she had heard often in recent months, especially in connection with her own airline. There had been murmurs of a merger, rumors that the management structure would undergo significant changes, but she never imagined the CEO of Solara himself would be on her flight, let alone sitting quietly in economy class. For a moment, Claire felt a wave of panic. Had she treated him poorly? Dismissively? She mentally replayed her interactions with the man, remembering his calm demeanor and the brief exchange over a bottle of water. It had been professional, she assured herself, but perhaps not as attentive as it should have been. Why would a CEO fly in economy? She asked, more to herself than Melissa. Melissa shrugged. Maybe he was trying to keep a low profile. But can you imagine if he was assessing us? Like testing how we treat passengers. The thought made Claire's chest tighten. The idea that her work might have been scrutinized without her knowing filled her with unease. She prided herself on her professionalism, but the reality of her snap judgments gnawed at her. Had she seen the man's simple attire and dismissed him as just another passenger? Had she overlooked the quiet authority in his demeanor? Claire shook off the thought and continued her work. As the crew gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the aircraft, Mark called them together for a quick meeting. "I just wanted to commend everyone for handling the flight well," Mark began, his tone serious but encouraging, especially with Mr. Delaney on board. "Mr. Delaney?" Claire asked, the name unfamiliar. Mark nodded. "Alexander Delaney, CEO of Solara Aviation." He was seated in 17A. A murmur rippled through the group. Claire's heart sank further. She had interacted with one of the most powerful figures in the industry and hadn't even realized it. Mark continued. He didn't announce himself, which speaks volumes about his humility. But let's remember that every passenger deserves the same level of care, whether they're a CEO or not. His words struck a chord with Claire. She knew he wasn't singling anyone out, but it felt personal. She had treated Mr. Delaney as just another face in the crowd, and now it felt like a missed opportunity, not to impress him, but to show the kind of respect she should extend to every passenger. As the crew dispersed, Claire lingered, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed some unspoken test. She needed to understand more about the man she had encountered and why he had chosen to fly under the radar. Later that evening, Claire couldn't resist doing a quick search on Alexander Delaney. The first results revealed a string of articles detailing his rise from humble beginnings to becoming the CEO of Solara Aviation. He was known for his hands-on leadership style, often surprising employees and passengers with unannounced visits. He valued humility and believed in experiencing the services his company offered from every perspective, including the economy cabin. Claire read on, fascinated. Delaney's philosophy was rooted in his upbringing, a modest life in a small town where his parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet. He carried those values with him, insisting that success didn't excuse anyone from treating others with kindness and respect. Her chest tightened as she thought about how she had initially perceived him. His attire, his quiet demeanor, it had all seemed so ordinary. But beneath that simplicity lay a man who had reshaped an entire industry. The next morning, Claire's mind was still heavy with thoughts of Delaney as she prepared for her next flight. She resolved to approach her work differently, to treat every passenger with the same level of care and respect, regardless of their outward appearance. When she boarded the plane, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. As she greeted passengers, she looked at each of them more closely, not to judge, but to understand. The elderly woman with trembling hands, the young couple with matching backpacks, the businessman with a furrowed brow. All of them had stories she would never know, but that didn't mean they deserved anything less than her best. As she walked down the aisle, checking on passengers, she stopped by a middle-aged man who seemed agitated, his eyes darting around nervously. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her tone soft but attentive. The man hesitated before nodding. "Yes, just a little nervous about flying." Claire offered a reassuring smile. "Let me know if there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable." The man seemed to relax slightly, and Claire moved on, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time the flight took off, Claire felt more in control of her emotions. She couldn't change the past, but she could change how she approached the future. And as the plane soared into the sky, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever cross paths with Alexander Delaney again. And if, when that day came, she would be ready to show him the person she was striving to become. The meeting. A week after the fateful flight, Claire's routine had returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. The thought of Alexander Delaney still lingered in her mind, but she had thrown herself into her work, determined to learn from the experience. She made a conscious effort to approach every passenger with an open mind, reminding herself that every interaction mattered. It was during one of her layovers in New York when everything changed. Claire had just finished a quick lunch in the airport cafeteria when her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from her airline's headquarters, marked urgent. Crew briefing with Solara Aviation leadership. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked on the message. The email outlined a mandatory meeting for all crew members assigned to specific routes, including hers. Representatives from Solara Aviation, including their CEO, Alexander Delaney, would be present to discuss the upcoming merger and the company's vision moving forward. Claire's stomach tightened. The idea of being in the same room as Delaney, especially after her misstep during the flight, filled her with unease. She wondered if he would recognize her, or if she had simply been another forgettable face in a sea of employees. Still, she knew she couldn't let her apprehension show. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to him, but to herself. The following morning, Claire arrived at the conference room in the airline's corporate office. The space was buzzing with energy as crew members from various departments gathered, chatting in hushed tones about what to expect. A large screen at the front of the room displayed the Solara Aviation logo alongside the name of her airline, a symbol of their impending partnership. Claire took a seat near the middle, hoping to blend into the crowd. She clutched a notebook in her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously as she scanned the room. The air was thick with anticipation, and the occasional murmur about Delaney reached her ears. After a few minutes, the door at the front of the room opened, and a group of executives entered. At the center of the group was Alexander Delaney. He was dressed as simply as he had been on the flight, a navy blazer over a plain white shirt, paired with dark jeans. His unassuming appearance contrasted sharply with the polished suits of the other executives. Yet the moment he stepped into the room, his presence commanded attention. Conversations quieted, and all eyes turned toward him. Delaney approached the podium, his movements deliberate but unhurried. He began speaking, his voice calm yet resonant. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As we move forward with the merger between Solara Aviation and your airline, it's important to me that we start with transparency and mutual respect." Claire found herself leaning forward, captivated by his words. He spoke not with the rehearsed polish of a corporate executive, but with the authenticity of someone who had walked the same paths as those he addressed. He talked about the values that had shaped his company: humility, innovation, and treating every individual with dignity, regardless of their title or role. As he spoke, Claire couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had judged him too quickly during their flight, not recognizing the depth of his character. But listening to him now, she felt a renewed determination to embody the values he was describing. After the presentation, there was a brief cue and a session. Several crew members stood to ask questions, and Delaney answered each one thoughtfully. Claire stayed in her seat, unsure if she had the courage to speak. But as the session drew to a close, she felt an overwhelming urge to address him. Her hand shot up before she could second-guess herself. Delaney glanced in her direction, his gaze steady but not intimidating. "Yes, go ahead," he said, gesturing for her to speak. Claire stood, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. "Good morning, Mr. Delaney," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm Claire, a flight attendant on the cross-country route. I just wanted to thank you for your leadership and for reminding us of the importance of humility and respect. I also wanted to apologize." The room went silent. All eyes were on Claire, and she felt her cheeks flush, but she pressed on. "I was on the flight you took last week," she continued, her voice growing steadier, "and I didn't realize who you were at the time. I treated you like any other passenger, which is what we're trained to do, but I also made assumptions based on appearances. I want you to know that your presence on that flight has changed the way I approach my work. So thank you for that lesson." Delaney's expression softened as she spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Thank you for your honesty, Claire," he said, his voice carrying a genuine warmth. "It's not easy to admit when we've made mistakes, but it's a sign of growth. And for what it's worth, I appreciated the way you treated me. You were professional and courteous. That's all I ask of anyone." A wave of relief washed over Claire, but also a sense of pride. She had confronted her mistake head-on, and his response had been gracious, just as she had hoped. After the meeting ended, Claire lingered near the exit, hoping for a brief moment to speak with Delaney one-on-one. As the crowd dispersed, he approached her, his demeanor as calm and approachable as ever. "Claire," he said, extending a hand, "thank you again for what you said earlier. It means a lot." She shook his hand, feeling the strength and sincerity in his grip. "Thank you, Mr. Delaney. I've learned a lot from that flight, and from today." He smiled faintly. "Good. That's all any of us can do. Keep learning." As he walked away, Claire felt a sense of closure, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She had been given a second chance, not just to prove herself, but to grow into the kind of person she aspired to be. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to rise to the challenge. The shift in perspective. Claire returned to her routine with a new sense of clarity after her encounter with Alexander Delaney. The experience had not only humbled her, but also opened her eyes to the subtleties of human interaction. She realized her job as a flight attendant wasn't just about providing service. It was about connection, understanding, and recognizing the humanity in every passenger. But change wasn't easy. The very next week, she encountered one of the most challenging flights of her career. It was a packed red-eye flight from New York to San Francisco, with every seat occupied and passengers already weary from long days. The mood on board was tense. Grumpy travelers and crying infants created an atmosphere ripe for conflict. Claire reminded herself of Delaney's words and the lesson she'd learned. She resolved to approach every interaction with patience and empathy. As the flight progressed, Claire noticed a man in his mid-50s seated near the emergency exit. He was sharply dressed in a tailored gray suit and carried an air of importance. From the moment he boarded, he had been brusque, snapping at the ground crew over the size of his carry-on and refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Claire approached him cautiously during beverage service. "Good evening, sir. May I offer you something to drink?" The man didn't look up from his tablet. "Just coffee," he muttered, his tone clipped. She brought him a cup of steaming coffee and placed it on his tray table. "Here you go, sir. Let me know if there's anything else you need." He barely acknowledged her, and Claire walked away, suppressing the urge to roll her eyes. It was tempting to dismiss him as another entitled businessman, but she stopped herself. Everyone has a story, she reminded herself, echoing the mantra she had adopted since her encounter with Delaney. An hour later, as Claire walked through the cabin, she noticed the man rubbing his temples, his tablet abandoned on his lap. His coffee sat untouched. His body language had shifted, his shoulders slumped, and his previously rigid posture seemed to melt into exhaustion. She approached again, this time without her usual preamble. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked gently. The man looked up, startled, as if no one had ever asked him that question before. For a moment, his stern facade faltered. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Claire hesitated, sensing an opportunity to connect. "You seem a bit stressed. If there's anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let me know." The man's eyes softened, and he sighed. "It's been a long day. My son's in the hospital in San Francisco, and I'm trying to make it there before visiting Hours End tomorrow morning." Claire's chest tightened with empathy. She hadn't expected such vulnerability from someone who initially seemed so unapproachable. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said sincerely. "Is there anything you need? A blanket? A snack?" The man shook his head, but offered a small, grateful smile. "No, but thank you for asking. It means more than you know." For the rest of the flight, Claire made it a point to check on him periodically, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible. By the time the plane landed, the man's demeanor had completely shifted. As he disembarked, he stopped by Claire and said, "Thank you. You reminded me that there's still kindness in the world, even when things feel so heavy." Claire smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. "Safe travels, sir. I hope everything goes well with your son." He nodded and walked away, leaving Claire with a profound sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, she realized. It was the small, meaningful moments of connection that could make all the difference. The test. Over the next few months, Claire continued to apply her newfound perspective to her work. She found that by treating every passenger as an individual with a unique story, her job became more rewarding. She was no longer simply serving drinks or ensuring compliance with safety regulations. She was building bridges, however brief, between herself and the people she encountered. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. On a routine flight from Dallas to Chicago, Claire encountered a passenger who pushed her patience to its limits. A young woman in her late 20s, dressed in designer athleisure and carrying an oversized tote, boarded with an air of entitlement. From the start, she made her displeasure known. "I specifically requested an aisle seat," she snapped, her manicured finger jabbing at her boarding pass. "Why am I stuck by the window?" Claire maintained her composure. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. The flight is full, but I can check if anyone is willing to switch seats with you." The woman rolled her eyes. "Fine. Just hurry up. I can't sit here." Claire approached several passengers, But no one was willing to trade seats. She returned to the woman with an apologetic smile. "Unfortunately, no one is available to switch at the moment. If anything changes, I'll let you know right away." The woman huffed loudly, sinking into her seat with dramatic frustration. Throughout the flight, she continued to find fault with everything. The lack of Wi-Fi, the temperature of her drink, the noise from nearby passengers. Claire responded to each complaint with unwavering professionalism, but by the end of the flight, her patience was wearing thin. As the plane descended into Chicago, Claire prepared for the final interaction. She approached the woman to ensure her seatbelt was fastened. "We'll be landing shortly, ma'am. Is there anything else I can assist you with before we arrive?" The woman sighed, looking out the window. For the first time, her tone softened. "No. I've had a really hard week." Claire paused, her irritation giving way to curiosity. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said gently. "If there's anything you need, just let me know." The woman glanced at Claire, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "My dad passed away a few days ago," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'm flying to Chicago for the funeral." Claire's heart sank. All the woman's frustration and rudeness suddenly made sense. She had been carrying an invisible burden, and it had manifested in ways Claire couldn't have anticipated. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Claire said sincerely. "That must be incredibly difficult." The woman nodded, her facade crumbling. "Thank you. And I'm sorry for being so difficult." Claire offered her a reassuring smile. "It's okay. We all have our moments." By the time the passengers disembarked, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. The young woman's words stayed with her, a poignant reminder that everyone carries unseen struggles. It wasn't always easy to look past someone's behavior, to see the person underneath, but Claire knew it was worth the effort. As she watched the passengers leave, Claire thought about Alexander Delaney once more. His unassuming presence and quiet wisdom had sparked a transformation in her, a transformation that was still unfolding, one flight at a time. The unexpected visit. Months had passed since Claire's memorable encounter with Alexander Delaney, and her perspective on her role as a flight attendant had completely shifted. She no longer saw her job as merely a series of tasks, but as an opportunity to connect with people in meaningful, albeit fleeting, ways. Her interactions with passengers became more intentional, her patience deeper, and her empathy stronger. But life had a way of presenting unexpected opportunities for growth. One crisp autumn morning, Claire reported for duty at a bustling airport. Her schedule showed a short-haul flight to Washington, D.C., a routine trip that didn't promise anything out of the ordinary. As she prepped the cabin and greeted passengers, she noticed an air of quiet anticipation among the crew. Mark, the head flight attendant, approached her with a clipboard and a conspiratorial smile. "Guess who's flying with us today?" he said, his tone low but teasing. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Not another celebrity, I hope." The last time, I had to calm a crowd of fans who nearly trampled the galley. Mark chuckled. "Not quite. It's Alexander Delaney." Claire froze. "Delaney? As in the Alexander Delaney?" Mark nodded, clearly enjoying her reaction. "He's in first class this time, though. I guess he decided to treat himself." Her heart raced. After her earlier apology and their brief interaction at the crew briefing months ago, she hadn't expected to see him again. She wondered if he would remember her, or if she had simply been one of the countless faces he encountered in his position. The thought made her palms sweat, but she quickly composed herself. "This is just another flight," she told herself firmly. "Treat him like any other passenger." When Delaney boarded, Claire was struck again by his simplicity. He was dressed in a dark blazer over a plain white shirt, his demeanor as understated as ever. He greeted the crew with a polite nod, his eyes briefly meeting Claire's. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a spark of recognition in his gaze, but he said nothing as he settled into his seat. Throughout the flight, Claire worked diligently, ensuring every passenger was comfortable. She approached Delaney's seat with her usual professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Delaney. Can I offer you something to drink?" He looked up, his expression warm but reserved. "Just water. Thank you." She nodded, retrieving a bottle of water and placing it on his tray table. "Let me know if there's anything else you need." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Claire, isn't it?" Her heart skipped a beat. He remembered her name. She turned back, her professionalism masking her surprise. "Yes, sir. It's good to see you again." Delaney smiled faintly, his calm presence putting her at ease. "Likewise, I appreciated what you said during the briefing a few months ago. It's rare to see someone willing to acknowledge their mistakes so openly." Claire felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you, sir. That moment taught me a lot. About myself, and about the way I approach my work." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've noticed. The way you interact with passengers, it's different, more deliberate." His observation caught her off guard. The fact that he had noticed her efforts filled her with a quiet sense of pride. "It means a lot to hear that, sir. I've tried to see each passenger as an individual with their own story and struggles. It's changed the way I view this job." Delaney's smile deepened, a rare warmth softening his sharp features. "That perspective will take you far, not just in this role, but in life." For the rest of the flight, Claire couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of determination. Knowing that Delaney had recognized her growth made her more committed than ever to upholding the values she had adopted. She moved through the cabin with a calm confidence, ensuring every passenger felt valued. Toward the end of the flight, Delaney called her over. She approached his seat, curious. "Mr. Delaney, is there anything I can assist you with?" He gestured to the empty seat across from him in the first-class cabin, inviting her to sit. Claire hesitated, glancing around to ensure her colleagues were managing the cabin. When she saw that everything was under control, she took the seat, her curiosity growing. Delaney leaned forward slightly, his tone conversational. "You've been with this airline for a while, haven't you?" Claire nodded. "Just over a decade, sir." "And what have you learned in that time?" he asked, his gaze steady. The question caught her off guard, but she didn't hesitate. "I've learned that people are far more complex than they appear. Everyone carries their own burdens, their own stories. It's easy to judge someone based on a brief interaction, but there's always more beneath the surface. My job has taught me the importance of patience, empathy, and humility." Delaney studied her for a moment, as though weighing her words. "That's a perspective many people take a lifetime to develop. You're ahead of the curve." Claire smiled, feeling a swell of gratitude for his kind words. "Thank you, sir. I owe a lot of that growth to the lessons I've learned from passengers, and from people like you." Delaney tilted his head slightly. "People like me. You taught me to look beyond appearances," she said honestly. "Your quiet leadership and humility have been a powerful example." Delaney leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Claire, I spend a lot of time meeting people in this industry, pilots, executives, ground crew. But it's the people who take the time to understand others, to truly see them, who leave the strongest impression. You're one of those people." Her heart swelled at his words. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." As the flight landed and passengers began to disembark, Delaney paused at the front of the cabin. He turned to Claire, extending a hand. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said firmly. "You have the ability to make a difference, not just for passengers, but for the people you work with." Claire shook his hand, her grip steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." As Delaney walked away, Claire felt a profound sense of purpose. She had come a long way from the flight where she had made her initial mistake, and she knew her journey of growth was far from over. But in that moment, she felt ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the lessons she had learned and the confidence to keep striving for more. The catalyst for change. It had been a month since Claire's second encounter with Alexander Delaney, and her work felt more meaningful than ever. She approached each flight with a newfound sense of responsibility, ensuring that every passenger felt valued and seen. Her interactions with Delaney had left an indelible mark on her, but she had no idea how far-reaching the effects of those conversations would be. One cold winter morning, Claire received an unexpected email from her airline's headquarters. The subject line read, "Invitation to Leadership Workshop. Special guest speaker." She opened the email with curiosity and discovered that she had been personally selected to attend a leadership seminar hosted by Solara Aviation. The workshop promised insights into the company's vision and included a session led by none other than Alexander Delaney. Her heart raced as she read the details. The seminar would take place at Solara's headquarters in San Francisco, a sleek glass and steel building overlooking the bay. The idea of attending such an event filled her with equal parts excitement and nervousness. What role would she play in a room filled with seasoned executives and industry leaders? Did Delaney have anything to do with her invitation? With a deep breath, Claire resolved to attend. She had grown too much to let fear hold her back now. The workshop. The day of the workshop arrived, and Claire found herself walking into Solara's pristine headquarters. The interior was as impressive as she had imagined, modern and minimalist, with large windows that offered breathtaking views of the Golden Gate Bridge. The air buzzed with energy as participants gathered in the conference room, exchanging introductions and business cards. Claire felt a pang of imposter syndrome as she scanned the room. Most of the attendees were senior executives and department heads, dressed in impeccable suits and exuding confidence. She, a flight attendant in her polished uniform, felt distinctly out of place. Before she could let her doubts take hold, a familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Claire." She turned to see Alexander Delaney approaching. He wore his signature understated attire, a charcoal blazer over a black sweater, but his presence was as commanding as ever. He extended a hand, his expression warm. "I'm glad you made it," he said. "Thank you for the invitation, sir," Claire replied, shaking his hand. "I wasn't expecting to be here, but I'm honored." Delaney's smile widened. "You're here because you deserve to be. Leadership isn't just about titles or roles. It's about how we show up for others. And you've shown that in your work." His words bolstered her confidence, and she nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best to live up to that." The workshop began with a series of presentations on innovation and customer service, led by some of Solara's top executives. Claire listened intently, taking notes and absorbing the insights shared by the speakers. But the highlight of the day came when Delaney himself took the stage. He began by sharing his journey, his modest upbringing, the challenges he faced building Solara Aviation, and the principles that guided his leadership. His voice was steady and resonant, his words carrying the weight of experience. "Leadership," he said, "isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about listening, understanding, and empowering others. It's about recognizing that every individual, no matter their role, has the potential to create change." Claire felt a lump rise in her throat as his words struck a chord. She thought about her own journey, the assumptions she had made, the lessons she had learned, and the growth she had experienced. For the first time, she began to see herself as more than just a flight attendant. She was part of something larger, a force for positive change within the industry. The conversation that changed everything. After the session, participants broke into smaller groups for discussions. Claire found herself sitting at a table with Delaney and a handful of other attendees. They discussed challenges in the airline industry, from improving customer experience to fostering a positive work culture. At one point, Delaney turned to Claire, his gaze steady. "Claire, based on your experience, what do you think is the biggest challenge we face in connecting with our passengers?" Her pulse quickened as the room fell silent, all eyes on her. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I think it's about breaking through the barriers we create between ourselves and our passengers," she said. "It's easy to focus on efficiency and processes, but we forget that every person who boards a plane has a story, a reason for being there. If we can find ways to acknowledge that, to make people feel seen and valued, we can transform their experience. Delaney nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. That's a powerful insight, he said. And it's exactly the kind of perspective we need to bring to the forefront. The conversation continued, but Claire's words seemed to resonate with the group. Several participants referenced her point, and Delaney himself revisited it during his closing remarks. A new chapter. As the workshop came to a close, Delaney approached Claire once more. "You have a gift for seeing what others overlook," he said. "I'd like to invite you to join a new initiative we're launching, a program designed to improve the way we train our staff to connect with passengers on a deeper level." Claire's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Me?" Delaney smiled. "Absolutely. Your perspective is invaluable, and I believe you have a lot to offer. Think about it, and let me know." Overwhelmed but deeply honored, Claire nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll give it serious thought." That night, as she flew home, Claire stared out the window at the twinkling lights below. She thought about how far she had come since her first encounter with Delaney. What had started as a mistake had blossomed into an opportunity for growth, self-reflection, and purpose. She realized that her journey wasn't just about becoming a better flight attendant. It was about becoming a better person. Claire smiled to herself, her heart full of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. And somewhere high above the clouds, she found a sense of peace, knowing that her journey was just beginning. That evening, Claire sat in her apartment, the quiet hum of the city below her window. The day had been transformative, but she couldn't stop thinking about Delaney's offer. The chance to be part of a new initiative wasn't just a professional opportunity. It was a calling. For years, she had worked tirelessly in a role she once thought of as routine, but today had affirmed that her work held the power to create lasting change. She spent hours replaying Delaney's words in her mind, jotting down ideas and reflecting on her journey. As the night deepened, her thoughts crystallized into a single resolution. She would accept the offer. This was her chance to contribute something meaningful, to channel her growth into a purpose larger than herself. The beginning of the initiative. 2 months later, Claire stood in front of a small group of flight attendants, trainers, and industry professionals at Solara Aviation's headquarters. She had been invited to present her vision for the new initiative, a comprehensive program called the Human Connection Project. The initiative aimed to reframe the way airline staff approached passenger interactions. It wasn't about increasing efficiency or ticking boxes. It was about empathy, understanding, and treating every passenger as an individual with their own story. Claire had crafted the program with input from her peers, drawing on her own experiences and the lessons she had learned. Standing at the podium, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Delaney sat in the front row, his calm demeanor and encouraging smile giving her the confidence to begin. "Good afternoon, everyone," Claire started, her voice steady but passionate. "When I became a flight attendant, I thought my job was to ensure safety, provide good service, and follow procedures. But over the years, I've realized it's so much more than that. It's about connection. It's about being present for people, even in the smallest ways." She paused, scanning the room. We've all been guilty of assumptions. We see passengers as numbers, rows, or seat assignments. But behind every ticket is a person. Someone with fears, dreams, and struggles. The Human Connection Project is about reminding us to see the human being behind the passenger. The room was silent, but the energy was palpable. Claire continued, detailing the program's goals, which included training modules on active listening, cultural sensitivity, and emotional intelligence. She shared anecdotes from her own career, including her encounters with Delaney and the lessons they had taught her. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Delaney was the first to stand, clapping with genuine pride. As Claire stepped away from the podium, he approached her, his handshake firm and his smile wide. "You've captured exactly what this industry needs," he said. This is the kind of leadership I hoped to inspire." Claire beamed, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done this without the lessons I've learned from you and the experiences I've had along the way." Delaney's smile softened. "It's all you, Claire. You've turned a moment of reflection into a movement. That's true leadership, a lasting legacy." Over the next year, the Human Connection Project rolled out across Solara Aviation and its partner airlines. Claire became a key figure in the program, traveling to training sessions and sharing her story with crew members around the world. She found herself mentoring others, helping them see the potential for growth in their own careers and lives. The program's impact was profound. Passenger satisfaction scores rose, but more importantly, stories of meaningful connections began to emerge. Flight attendants comforting grieving passengers, pilots greeting nervous flyers with reassurance, and ground crew going the extra mile for families in need. Claire's journey came full circle when she received a letter from a passenger, a young woman who had flown on one of her flights. The woman described how Claire's kindness during a difficult time had left a lasting impression, inspiring her to pursue a career in the airline industry. As Claire read the letter, tears welled in her eyes. She had always hoped to make a difference, but she hadn't realized the ripple effect her actions could have. A flight home. One evening, after a long day of training, Claire boarded a flight home to New York. She took a seat in economy class, grateful for the quiet time to reflect. As the plane taxied down the runway, she stared out the window at the fading sunlight, her thoughts drifting to the path that had brought her here. When the flight attendant approached to offer her a drink, Claire smiled warmly and said, "Just water, thank you." The young woman nodded, her professionalism reminiscent of Claire's earlier days. But as she turned to leave, she paused. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you Claire?" From the Human Connection Project. Claire blinked, surprised. "Yes, I am." The flight attendant's face lit up. "I've been through your training sessions. Your story really inspired me. It changed the way I see my work." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." As the flight continued, Claire stared out at the vast expanse of clouds, a sense of peace settling over her. She realized that her journey wasn't just about her growth. It was about empowering others to see the world differently, one passenger at a time. And as the plane soared through the sky, Claire smiled, knowing that her work, her story, and her purpose were taking flight in ways she had never imagined.